We come AMC theaters. We make movies better.
I got a Glock in my...
If a director makes one good movie, he's immediately perfect no matter what. For Michael Bay, I can forgive all the Transformers movies and those god-awful TMNT movies because he made Armageddon. M. Night Shyamalan might have made The Last Airbender, but at least he made Unbreakable in The Sixth Sense. Okay, that's like saying one wing from Wingstop makes the entire $30 order worth it. Wingstop sucks. The same could be said in reverse. Just because a great director has so many great movies doesn't mean they don't have a worse movie. As far as filmography goes, you have to have one that is considered the worst. That's why I didn't call this video Bad Movies from Great Directors, because even though, yes, bad movies do exist in great directors' filmographies, some directors' worst films still represents their style, and sometimes are even decent. So today, we're going to look over amazing directors and what I consider their worst movies. Keep in mind, it's all personal opinion. I can't wait to talk about Not You. Anyways, here we go! Guillermo del Toro. It's so funny that Guillermo del Toro is such a creative and respected director that his worst movie is somewhat still decent. It's Blade 2. Yeah, this is the guy behind Pan's Labyrinth, The Shape of Water, and Hellboy. The good one. Obviously, with a film like Blade 2, which in itself is still a decent superhero flick, you clearly have his worst flick. I was considering Mimic, but I do think that one ties more into his style, despite it not being his best work in my opinion. Blade 2 is the follow-up to one of the most influential 90s superhero movies of the decade. I mean, of course, the standard was... Okay, you know what? Batman Returns wasn't that bad. Blade 2 is not the first film by a long shot, but Wesley Snipes is still very charming as the lead. It certainly captures the style of Del Toro, but it clearly wasn't his realm. Which is funny, he did Pacific Rim in 2013, and that film captured his style while also being Power Rangers, not the fucking movie. I don't think calling Blade 2 his worst film is even insulting, because while I do like the first film way better, it certainly wasn't a bad film. And hey, at least it's not Blade Trinity. Oh, why did I acknowledge it?
Sofia Coppola.
Being the literal daughter of Francis Ford Coppola might be the biggest pressure you could have in Hollywood. However, not only has Sofia Coppola proven that she can fill those shoes, but she's shown a much different style compared to her admittedly famous fathers. That being said, thankfully, unlike Del Toro, she has a few candidates. The two big ones being Marie Antoinette in 2006 and The Bling Ring in 2013. And while I don't think The Bling Ring is all that bad, I have to go with the majority on this and say Marie Antoinette is her worst film. Give the poor girl credit, it is difficult to pull the story off without being too Downton Abbey. And yeah, it's kind of hard to call this one good. I don't think it's a god-awful flick, but it clearly took too little liberties and ended up just being okay. I will say that Kirsten Dunst is actually pretty good in the titular role, tits. The rest of the cast do hold their weight, but yeah, this was clearly a better idea than execution. Execution!
Wes Anderson.
As I've said before, I love Wes Anderson. He's one of my favorite directors, and as of writing this, I cannot wait to see Asteroid City. Update, I've seen Asteroid City, so what would I consider his worst movie? I went back and forth with movies like Bottle Rocket, which obviously that's his first feature. I argued if The Darjeeling Limited was his worst film, considering it's not as talked about as his other movies. And then I actually argued that it was Fantastic Mr. Fox, and yeah, I had to admit Life Aquatic is his worst one. Like Del Toro, this is just the standard he set for himself. This is a director that has a filmography unlike any other. His best movies are consisted of films like Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Grand Budapest Hotel, Isle of Dogs, Moonrise Kingdom. Life Aquatic is not a bad movie, but it certainly is his worst one. The story is even more mismanaged than his usual mismanaged story, but it does have that iconic look and feel. It's clearly his worst, but considering his filmography, that's not a bad thing.
The Coen Brothers, oh my goodness.
The Coen Brothers are such interesting creatures. One minute they're making The Big Lebowski, the next they're making The Lady Killers. Yeah, I can't even question other movies. Lady Killers is not only the worst Coen Brothers film by a long shot, but it's also one of the few Tom Hanks performances I can only describe as not it chief. Compared to their other works like The Big Lebowski, Fargo, hell, even Ballad of Buster Scruggs, The Lady Killers is so different in quality, and what's worse, they brought Tom Hanks down with them. Oh
No!
George Lucas.
Man, George Lucas, the indie director turned visionary extraordinaire, the man behind so many iconic films. What could his worst film be? It's Phantom Menace. It's fucking Phantom Menace. I've mentioned before how I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. I can't get into it. If you can, that's great. What's important now, though, is that we shame George Lucas for bringing Jar Jar Binks to life. As I mentioned before, I consider this one of the two Star Wars movies that, as a non-Star Wars fan, I can see Star Wars fans not getting into. It deals with trade politics and politics in general. When does Darth Spock show up? No doubt, this is George Lucas's worst.
Real f***ing original.
Richard Linkletter.
Though not as familiar as Del Toro or Anderson, Richard Linkletter is a director like no other. The director behind the critically acclaimed Boyhood, the 90s classic Dazed and Confused, the criminally underrated A Scanner Darkly, the Bad News Bears remake, found his worst one. No, don't try showing me other choices. It's the fucking Bad News Bears remake. The fact that the 1976 film wasn't enough and we had 2 sequels, a so-so TV show, and now a remake in 2005? The Bad News Bears story was definitely original in 1976, but considering the fucking Mighty Ducks came out between then and 2005, the Misfits turned champion story is getting pretty freaking old. You can't act like this is one of the worst movies of all time or even one of the worst remakes, but considering Linkletter's other outings, Bad News Bears 2005 is no doubt his worst film.
Alexander Payne.
Like Linkletter, Alexander Payne isn't a very familiar name to many, but also like Linkletter, he has a very unique style to his work. Movies like Nebraska, The Descendants, and Sideways all being under his belt. Not to mention the 1999 indie classic Election. Yeah, no fucking duh his worst movie is Downsizing. Unlike Linkletter or anyone else whose worst movie clearly changed their style, I can still tell this was a movie directed by Payne. But not only is this movie incredibly lame with premise and story, this has to be one of Matt Damon's most phoned-in performances. It sucks because I do like movies like Sideways and Election, and this movie seems like it could have been along those lines. But its execution definitely didn't help anything. Downsize these nuts, yep.
David Fincher.
David Fincher is a very creative individual. Movies like Fight Club, The Social Network, Zodiac, and Gone Girl all being helmed by him. Considering he started with music videos, I wonder what his first feature film was. Shit. Considering this dude's massively impressive catalog, it's no doubt that his first film, the third in one of the most iconic sci-fi franchises of all time, is his worst flick. Alien 3 is so much different both in quality and concept from the first 2 Alien films. And especially after multiple rewrites, negotiations, and somehow this still isn't the worst Alien film. Dude, I'm sick and tired of seeing Alien Isolation on Xbox Game Pass. I ain't playing that shit. Alien 3 changes so much about what Alien and Aliens set up, and it definitely serves as Fincher's biggest blunder.
David Lynch.
With such an extensive and impressive career like David Lynch's, you probably think it was hard to pinpoint his worst film. No, it wasn't. His worst film is the original Dune movie by a long shot. It's so funny that the 2021 film is so highly respected because for a while, this was the reason people didn't want to see another Dune adaptation. And I can't really blame them, this isn't anything great. The problem is that it's way too complicated, you don't really remember the characters, and it's just nothing special. I guess it's starting to gain a cult status, so I guess there's that. But from the guy who literally reinvented the thriller mystery genre, it's hard for me to call this one much more than a mess.
Ava Duvernay.
She directed one of the most beautiful biopics in the last decade. She also directed Wrinkle in Time. Ava Duvernay has definitely proven her staying power in Hollywood, and I'll be the mature one and say most of Wrinkle in Time's issues came from outside sources like Disney and marketing, for a film that is anything but spectacular and magical. It's funny because it's not a terrible concept, and as I mentioned in my box office bombs video, this film still made a pretty penny, but couldn't keep up with its budget, its marketing, and it still leads to one of Disney's lesser live-action films in the last 6 to 7 years. And that is saying something!
Tim Burton.
Tim Burton being called a good director might be a stretch for some, but to me, this is on par with Wes Anderson when it comes to visuals and settings telling the story. But of course, sometimes Burton focuses too much on the visuals and we get a movie like fucking Mars Attacks. And while that movie certainly isn't good, his worst film has to be Dark Shadows. There's a lot wrong with this movie, and it's living proof that just because Johnny Depp is in a Tim Burton film doesn't mean that movie is going to be good. Look at Alice in Wonderland. It really focuses more on its visuals than its story, and even then the visuals don't always hit the way they do in movies like Sweeney Todd or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's just nothing in this I couldn't just get from Sweeney Todd or Sleepy Hollow. It practically has nothing in it that's interesting. Even with the other bad Burton movies, like Planet of the Apes or Mars Attacks, he still delivers at times. This has nothing in it, and truly for a Burton movie, that's saying something. But you just don't get it. Dark Shadows is the greatest.
Robert Zemeckis.
Robert Zemeckis is the visionary behind Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Contact, Flight, Welcome to Marwen, The Polar Express. Welcome to Marwen, despite him also being behind the 2022 Pinocchio remake, is Robert Zemeckis' worst film. Don't get me wrong, the 2022 Pinocchio remake came close and is a close second. But Welcome to Marwen is a manipulative, makes you feel good film that is so soulless from beginning to end. Steve Carell is usually a very charismatic actor, but Even he can't save some of this really lazy writing. One of Marwin's biggest flaws is once again focusing on the whimsiness of it rather than making the main character or story interesting. For sure the worst film of a great career. But yeah, 2022 Pinocchio sucks too.
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg is another one of those directors that clearly has a good track record but is far from perfect. A few of the candidates I saw for his worst were The Lost World, Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, the BFG, and the one that I just don't agree with, Ready Player One. Fuck you, Far Out Magazine. His worst one is 1941. This is clearly better as an SNL skit than a full-on features-length film. John Belushi has usually been great in everything I've seen him in, The Blues Brothers, Animal House, early SNL, but this just wasn't his film. What sucks most is Spielberg has shown success with war films in the past. One of his greatest films is a war movie. But clearly, he's good at war dramas and not war comedies. Hook was also a candidate. Yeah, no, it's fucking 1941.
Ang Lee.
Ang Lee is the director of such a variety of great films like Life of Pi, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. He directed What Man? Gemini Man is easily his worst. I've talked about it in the Box Office Bombs video, but the confusing story despite the interesting concept, and just not enough intrigue to support its interesting concept, Gemini Man has very few redeeming factors, aside from Will Smith's decent performance. From the guy who brought you Crouching Tiger, we get Crouching Gemini Man. Fuck it.
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard is the director behind Cinderella Man, Rush, A Beautiful Mind. He's got a pretty good track record. His worst movie is Inferno. Not only is Inferno itself not a very good movie, but it follows up on two relatively weaker releases, The Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. I mean, The Da Vinci Code is already based on an ass book, but it has Tom Hanks. Inferno is pretty much the Allegiant of the franchise, as in if they wanted to make the Picasso penis, I don't know, they really couldn't. Still, Ron Howard has way better movies, and this ain't one of them.
Danny Boyle.
Danny Boyle is the director behind 127 Hours, 28 Days, Slumdog Millionaire, T2 Transporting, The Good Steve Jobs Movie, Millions, Shallow Grave. Yeah, it's not a real surprise that his worst movie is The Beach. This one is just really weird. It was clearly better in concept than it was in execution. I think this island rumored to be a solitary beach paradise plot is pretty lame, despite it having freaking Leonardo DiCaprio in it. He made Inception make sense, and yet I still don't know what the fuck happened in that movie. Compared to his better movies like 127 Hours, Steve Jobs, and Slumdog Millionaire, this just doesn't have the right story. And that's unfortunate. Even his lesser films like Yesterday feel original and well done. For a guy I really respect, this is pretty weak.
Spike Lee.
I love Spike Lee. His style is so different. And Do the Right Thing might be one of my favorite all-time movies. I couldn't even argue his lesser work. She Hate Me is so bad. Well, what makes it so bad? Well, I'll spell it out for you. Yeah, like most of Lee's work, the film garnered some controversy for its commentary on corporate greed, which ends up not working as well as I'm sure Lee intended. But here's the thing, he's done good with that controversy before. Do the Right Thing had some controversy when it released, but clearly this wasn't the right way to tackle this subject. I usually really respect his work, but She Hate Me is definitely his worst.
Francis Ford Coppola.
The director of The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola, became an essential in Hollywood. Outside of Godfather, he became known for Apocalypse Now, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Jack. His worst movie is Jack. This is really just one of those 90s B comedies that wastes the potential of the incredibly amazing and the late Robin Williams. Like Flubber. The fuck is a flubber? He was a very funny man and he can make these ridiculous plots work. Look at something like Jumanji. But unfortunately, the idea of a man who ages rapidly can't be saved by even a great comedian like Williams. It sucks that Robin Williams couldn't pull this off because it's not like the 90s wasn't home to some bizarre stories from movies. Kindergarten Cop, Space Jam, Ace Ventura, weird movies were not a completely far-fetched thing. But this is too weird, and this was the decade where Being John Malkovich released. Oh my god, I don't want to be John Malkovich, dear god!
Antoine Fuqua.
The Equalizer, The Magnificent Seven, Southpaw, all of these movies make too much sense. Oh my god, shut up, dog. The Equalizer, The Magnificent Seven, Southpaw, all of these movies make too much sense. Let's make a movie that makes no sense. Antoine Fuqua is usually a really good director with a very notable style. So it is weird that his worst movie completely portrays that style, yet it's too damn confusing to be good. The story just doesn't add up, and it's usually really hard to follow. I usually like Mark Wahlberg and Chiwetel Ejiofor, but weirdly, they have no chemistry together in this. There's not much to this one. It's a standard bad action movie with a really hard to follow story.
John Singleton.
John Singleton had such a variety up to his death. Poetic Justice, Boys in the Hood, Four Brothers, Baby Boy, Shaft. Motherfucking Shaft! So what could his worst movie be? Abduction is for sure John Singleton's worst flick. Despite him also being the director behind Too Fast, Too Furious, I truly believe this is the worst of the two. This was at that point where it's clear Lautner was more of a side character than he was a main character, and this movie truly proves that. It demonstrates nothing of what made Singleton's work so interesting and different, and truly I consider it to be a weak point for his work.
David O. Russell.
David O. Russell? The guy behind Silver Linings Playbook? American Hustle? Oh, what could his worst movie be? Alright, see you next time!
Hey, what's up, Gabe? It's B, King Julian. Fuck you.